This is part 6 of Federalist number 22. Evils of this description ought not to be regarded as imaginary. One of the weak sides of republics, among their numerous advantages, is that they afford too easy an inlet to foreign corruption. An hereditary monarch, though often disposed to sacrifice his subject to his ambition, has so great a personal interest in the government and in the external glory of the nation that it is not easy for a foreign power to give him an equivalent for what he would sacrifice by treachery to the state. The world has accordingly been witness to few examples of this species of royal prostitution, though there have been abundant specimens of every other kind. In republics, persons elevated from the mass of the community by the suffrages of their fellow citizens to stations of great preeminence and power may find compensations for betraying their trust, which to any but minds actuated by superior virtue may appear to exceed the proportion of interest they have in the common stock, and to overbalance the obligation of duty. Hence it is that history furnishes us with so many mortifying examples of the prevalency of foreign corruption in republican governments. See how realistic he is about human nature? He says, we know monarchs are bad and they do horrible things. But a lot of times the kings, because they are ambitious, because they're prideful, and because the name of the country or the piece of land that they're king over is so associated with them and their families that it is very hard to corrupt them from outside. Of course, he's talking about the old times, because we know in this century there's been a lot of corruption in the kings. But he says in republics, he's talking about if you're establishing republics here, it's easy to find people that can be corrupted by money, because they will think of their short-term, for the most part, short-term interest instead of what is good for their country. He says there are maybe a small percentage of people that can be trusted not to sell themselves to foreign corrupting forces. But he says majority of the republics that we've studied, this has not been the case. Then he continues, how much this contributed to the ruin of the ancient commonwealths, has been already disclosed. We've already talked about corruption and weakness in the ancient republics and commonwealths in Federalist 18, 19, and 20. It is well known that the deputies of the United Provinces, that's United Netherlands, have in various instances been purchased by the emissaries of neighboring kingdom. The Earl of Chesterfield, if my memory serves me right, in a letter to his court, intimates that his success in an important negotiation must depend on his obtaining a major's commission for one of those deputies. Here, the Earl of Chesterfield, who had at one time been an ambassador of Britain to United Netherlands, in his writings, he had talked about United Netherlands, and he had talked about how he could buy favor by corrupting different deputies. So he's talking about, he says, well, United Netherlands is almost the closest thing to what we have in Confederacy right now. So he says others can come and buy our deputies if we do not fix this system and accept a new constitution. Yeah, and then he says, and in Sweden, the parties were alternately bought by France and England in so barefaced and notorious a manner that it excited universal disgust in the nation, and was a principal cause that the most limited monarch in Europe in a single day, without tumult, violence, or opposition, became one of the most absolute and uncontrolled. So he says, even look at Sweden. Britain and France were able to buy some of their deputies, and the situation became so bad, so chaotic, that people rose up and decided to put a absolute monarch, somebody like Gustavus III. They preferred an absolute tyrannical monarch to the system they had because of chaos that was created. He says we might do the same thing if we do not unite because of calamity between us, amongst us, because we might start a war and somebody might just say, let's have a king and let's have peace, regardless of what an authoritarian king it is. We'll be okay with it. A historian, J.R. Pohl, in one of his notes on the Federalist, says that it was actually Russia that was buying these deputies in Sweden, corrupting them, and not necessarily France or England. So thought I'd bring that up to you. The next paragraph, a circumstance which crowns the defects of the Confederation remains yet to be mentioned: the want of a judiciary power. Here's another very important point. Remember in part 1 of Federalist 22, I said there was no uniform system of judiciary, independent courts for the nation. So he says this is one of our other problems, main problems under the Confederacy. Laws are a dead letter without courts to expound and define their true meaning and operation. The treaties of the United States, to have any force at all, must be considered as part of the law of the land. Their true import here means importance, as far as respects individuals, must, like all other laws, be ascertained by judicial determinations. To produce uniformity in these determinations, they ought to be submitted in the last resort to one supreme tribunal. Notice supreme tribunal, he's capitalized it. He's talking about eventually all these matters. We have to understand when there are legal cases, legal challenges, at the end of the day, it has to go to one supreme authority, like Supreme Court of the United States. He says we don't have such a court system under the Confederacy, whereas in this new Constitution, we have given you a court system. And this tribunal ought to be instituted under the same authority which forms the treaties themselves. These ingredients are both indispensable. If there is in each state a court of final jurisdiction, there may be as many different final determinations on the same point as there are courts. There are endless diversities in the opinions of men. We often see not only different courts, but the judges of the same court differing from each other. To avoid the confusion which would unavoidably result from the contradictory decisions of a number of independent judicatories, all nations have found it necessary to establish one court paramount to the rest, possessing a general superintendence and authorized to settle and declare in the last resort a uniform rule of civil justice. In other words, if you have 13 states and you have 13 different court systems, 13 different rulings. That is going to create confusion, because you need, at the end of the day, you need a uniform law. People need to know where they stand. So he says, because of that, we need a supreme tribunal, a supreme court, to have the last call, to say the last thing. So focus on that, and in the next video we will try to finish Federalist 22.